Quick conversation about stock buybacks. It's simply nothing more than supply and demand, and it turns out to be one of the easiest ways for Wall Street to manipulate their numbers. Let's start with the reality that CEOs of publicly traded companies, that means a company that's got stock being bought and sold on the stock market, CEOs have a responsibility to do what's in the best interest of their shareholders. So not necessarily their customers, but the people who own the company's stock, which typically tend to be large institutions, possibly mutual funds. So what happens here? The CEO has a choice to make. They can choose to spend money on a new factory, research and development, and all the associated expenses that come with those types of activities. And those expenses tend not to help their earnings reports, which, by the way, happen 4 times a year. Every 90 days, the CEOs are on calls with Wall Street analysts. And they've got to report their numbers. And ideally, their numbers are better, or at least the direction of the numbers is better than where they were the previous quarter. So stock buybacks, what does that really mean? Well, instead of the CEO deciding to take money and buy that or pay for that new factory or new research and development, they decide instead to take that money and buy back their own company's stock, thereby reducing the supply of shares outstanding. And you think supply and demand, if you reduce the supply of something and you still have the same level, the same amount of people demanding the product, or in this case, the stock, the shares, if you reduce the supply, well, then the price goes up. And again, if a CEO and a CFO of a publicly traded company has a responsibility to do what's in the best interest of their shareholders, the stock buyback machine, well, that's a very simple tool, a simple process that can increase the price of the stock without the stock or the company itself having done any better. If a company has $1 million of earnings over 1 million shares outstanding, that's $1 earning per share. And that's what they report every quarter, their earnings per share. But if that company decides, we're going to buy back 100,000 of our company's shares, no longer will we have 1 million outstanding, we're going to have 900,000 shares available. Well, they have the same $1 million of earnings that next quarter. Now it's $1 million of earnings over 900,000 shares. That's $1.11 earnings per share. So it appears as though their earnings has gone up by 11%. Now, in today's media landscape, no one's really digging any deeper than the headline. And so what we see is earnings growth, when in reality, nothing's really changed beyond the manipulation of the amount of shares outstanding. Now, how is this possible? Well, it's helped, it's facilitated by the Federal Reserve. And what does that mean? Well, the Federal Reserve has artificially held interest rates down. And by doing that, these CEOs and CFOs effectively can borrow money for all intents and purposes for free. I mean, historically low interest rates allow companies to borrow money. And when they borrow money, that really means they're issuing bonds. They borrow this money, and again, instead of building the factory or doing more research and development, what do? They take this money and they buy back their own company's stock. So the Federal Reserve has artificially supported this practice, artificially meaning they're suppressing interest rates. They should be a lot higher than where they are right now. Here we are in the middle of September in 2021, and rates are still historically low. Should they be allowed to get back to normal? Well, we'd see a massive drop in the stock market. We'd probably see a massive drop in the real estate market, which would be good for the masses because it would allow people to afford things again. But that's not the Federal Reserve's game. The Federal Reserve could care less about the masses. The Federal Reserve is focused on helping the top 1/10 of 1%. And so those CEOs and CFOs continue to play this game of buying back company stock, artificially increasing their share prices through accounting gimmicks. So most people think, I'm doing well, the stock market's gone up, look at me, my account's grown. What's your plan for the inevitable correction? What happens when this game is discovered and this practice is no longer allowed? By the way, stock buybacks were once considered bad practice. It was something that wasn't allowed. Those rules have gone away. Hey, we're going to continue this conversation. We're going to talk more and more about these types of ideas. Look forward to seeing you. Hit the subscribe button. Enjoy the rest of your day. Be well.